Good afternoon. At this time, will sergeants please start their recordings?
The backup is on.
Thank you.
PC recording is running.
Thank you. And at this time, will Sergeant Bradley please start with his opening statement?
Okay. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Housing and Buildings, joint with the Committee of Finance. At this time, will all panelists please turn on the videos? To minimize disruption, please place electronic devices on vibrate or on silent mode. If you wish to submit a testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that's testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation, and we may begin.
Gavel in here. Good afternoon. I'm Councilmember Robert Cornegy, Chair of the Committee on Housing and Buildings. I want to thank Chair Drum from the Committee on Finance and other committee members for joining this hearing titled Oversight, examining the city's deed theft and deed fraud crisis. Deed theft and deed fraud are nearing crisis level in neighborhoods like Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights, both of which fall in my district. Deed theft can take different forms. A fake deed can be created, a homeowner's signature forged, and a fake deed with the forged signature can be recorded. The forger can then borrow against the property, sell it, or even go so far as to evict the rightful owner. In some cases where a property has been left vacant by the owner, the property can be transferred without the owner's knowledge. Another type of deed theft occurs when a scammer convinces a homeowner to sign their property over, for example, in the context of a foreclosure rescue scam. A scammer will reach out to a homeowner facing foreclosure, offering to rescue them in exchange for their signature on documents. The homeowner doesn't realize that, but by signing these documents, they're signing away their own homes. An October 2019 article in the New York Times highlighted these deed theft and deed fraud crises and told stories of people who were victims of deed theft and deed fraud. One woman, Broadis Baez, was tricked into selling her family's home worth $1.2 million for $120,000. These purchasers, who were later arrested, intended to flip her home and resell it. In another situation, a homeowner facing foreclosure was convinced to sign an agreement he believed was a preliminary sales agreement, but which in fact led to the unwitting sale of his home. With the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting mass unemployment, many more homeowners will end up vulnerable to deed theft and deed fraud. Today, the committees will hear from the Department of Finance and the Department of Housing Preservation and Development to learn about the city's efforts to prevent deed theft and deed fraud. We'll also be hearing 3 resolutions that I sponsored. The first, Resolution 1427, calls upon the New York State Legislature to pass and a governor to sign legislation that reforms New York State's notary laws. Faulty notarization can be found in nearly every complaint of deed theft and deed fraud. Unwitting notaries have played a role in deed theft by notarizing documents without the signatory being present, or by notarizing documents presented by an imposter claiming to represent the homeowner. The resolution will require background checks, fingerprinting, and training courses for notaries. The resolution would also require notaries to file official bonds to pay for damages should they commit any wrongdoings. Resolution 1429 calls upon the New York State Legislature to pass and the governor to sign legislation that would place more stringent standards on corporation names that mimic or otherwise resemble government agencies. Deed theft perpetrators will use names that sound like they belong to a government agency, lulling homeowners into a sense of trust and leading them to sign documents that unwittingly cause them to ultimately lose their homes. Finally, Resolution 1430 will call upon the New York State Legislature to pass and the governor to sign a bill that would designate all of Brooklyn as a cease and desist zone. As a result of this designation, homeowners in Brooklyn could place their names on a list that would bar them from harassment by speculators. I'd like to thank my colleagues from the Housing and Buildings and Finance Committees present today. I see Francisco Moya, Alika Samuel, Margaret Chin, Danny Drum, of course, I've mentioned before, Helen Rosenthal, Adrian Adams, Am I missing anyone? Farrah Lewis. I see somebody waving, but I can't see who that is. Oh, my buddy Fernando Cabrera from the Bronx. Am I missing anyone? That's all I can see from my screen. I apologize if I missed someone. Oh, I see Karen Kozlowitz waving vehemently in the background. Hey, Karen. Rory Lansman is also present. And with that, I'd like to thank all the advocates and New Yorkers who shared their experiences with me and my colleagues as we work to develop these measures. Your insights have been and will continue to be invaluable as we work to stop deed theft and deed fraud. We'll now hear from the infamous or famous committee chair, depending on who you ask, Chair of Finance, my colleague and friend, Danny Drum.
I hope that infamous is because I'm causing good trouble.
Absolutely, Danny.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair Cornegy. I'm Daniel Drum, and I'm the chair of the Finance Committee. We've just been reminded of the human devastation that deed theft and deed fraud is causing, especially in central and eastern Brooklyn and in southern Queens. Decades of rising property values, the foreclosure crisis, and now the desperation caused by COVID-19 together are making homeowners there especially vulnerable. Back in February 2016, under then Chair Jalissa Ferreras Copeland, the Committee on Finance convened an oversight hearing to better understand the city's deed theft and deed fraud crisis, with a special emphasis on the efforts by the administration to combat the problem. At that hearing, we learned of the efforts by the city register to identify document fraud and by the city sheriff to investigate it, and about the Department of Finance's Notice of Recorded Document program to inform homeowners wherever there are filings against their properties. We also learned of state legislative proposals supported by the register and sheriff that would enhance their abilities to combat the underlying problems and to help victims. Since then, the council has taken action, including codifying the Notice of Recorded Document program and expanding it by making it an opt-out program rather than one that required registration by the homeowner. Today, we're hearing legislation I've sponsored, Intro Number 1919, that will additionally require the Department of Finance to include in its recorded document notifications information on actions the interested party can take if such person suspects that a fraudulent document recording has occurred, including information about whom to contact for assistance, to file for a complaint, or to report an alleged criminal violation. We also require the Department of Finance to give quarterly reports about the utilization of this program, as well as on referrals to the sheriff regarding suspected deed fraud. From this deed fraud referral data, we have plenty of evidence that deed fraud continues today at concerningly high levels. Accordingly, deed fraud rightfully continues to attract much attention. In December 2018, an investigative grand jury convened by Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance released a report of its own that made recommendations for legal reforms. In March 2019, the state legislature convened its own joint hearing at Brooklyn Borough Hall to examine the crisis facing homeowners in Brooklyn and throughout New York City, including the problem of deed theft. After a troubling report on deed theft in Brooklyn, published by the New York Times last October, Governor Andrew Cuomo directed the State Department of Financial Services on Tuesday to look into the many instances of deed theft and deed fraud affecting communities of color. Finally, Attorney General Letitia James has been focused on combating deed fraud and deed theft. This January, she launched the Protect Our Homes initiative to protect homeowners from deed theft and through community education and outreach and enforcement, and by going door to door in Bedford-Stuyvesant to inform homeowners of various scams, along with dozens of other elected officials. I look forward to learning more from the administration to update us on their efforts. To help us monitor how effective they have been and to hear recommendations for further improvements that can be made to protect the innocent homeowner from deed fraud. Before turning the mic back to Chair Cornegy, I'd like to thank the staff of the Finance Division for the preparation of this hearing, especially my senior counsel, Rebecca Chasen, assistant counsel, Noah Brick, and finance analyst, Sarah Gastelum, and Luke Zangerly. Thank you very much, Chair Cornegy.
Thank you very much, Danny. Before we move forward with the hearing, we've been joined by Minority Leader Steve Matteo, Vanessa Gibson, Keith Powers, and Carlina Rivera. I want to apologize for anyone who I missed. It was just an omission based on my screen size and nothing more. I think that we're going to move forward and have Janan take over this portion of the hearing.
Before I speak, Councilmember Adams would like to make an opening.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Adams. Councilmember Adams, I think you're muted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I want to thank first Chairs Cornegy and Chair Drum for allowing me to deliver remarks regarding my bill, Intro 1913, which would require reporting on complaints received and investigations regarding recorded document fraud. Right now, New Yorkers are suffering from the financial impacts of COVID-19. They're struggling with food insecurity, loss of income, and many are afraid that they will lose what they have worked their whole lives for, their homes. Home ownership is part of the American dream, but in times of financial uncertainty, like many New Yorkers face right now, homeowners can become targets for deed fraud. Seemingly well-intentioned people may approach homeowners with contracts claiming to offer repair grants or other much-needed services, but oftentimes homeowners do not realize that they have been the target of a deed fraud scheme. With so much outreach, it can be difficult to differentiate for the real offers from the fraudulent ones. By the time the homeowner realizes what has happened, it may be too late, as the home may have already been sold or mortgaged literally right from underneath their feet. Unfortunately, state law prevents us from doing more rigorous checks before a deed is recorded. Until there is a shift in the state law, the City Council must demand updates from the Office of the Sheriff on the outcomes and strategies of their investigations. I also must draw the correlation of deed fraud with its evil fraternal twin, the Giuliani-esque tax lien sale. I look forward to today's hearing, and I ask my colleagues to support my bill, Intro 1913, and really to support all of the legislation presented today to protect homeowners across the city of New York. Thank you, chairs.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Adams. I just want to say that we also, in the room is also Mark Jonah, who's been here from the beginning, and Keith Powers, if I didn't mention Keith.
And Councilmember Perkins.
Thank you, Dan. Janan?
Hello, thank you. I am Janan Zilka, counsel to the committees Housing and Buildings at New York City Council. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you are called on to testify, at which point you will be unmuted by the host. I will be calling on panelists to testify. Please listen for your name to be called, as I will periodically announce who the next panelist will be. We will first hear testimony from the administration, then testimony from the New York County District Attorney's Office, followed by testimony from members of the public. Today, Sheriff Joseph Fucito of the New York City Department of Finance will be testifying. City Register Annette Hill and the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development Associate Commissioner of Preservation, Kim Darga, will be available for questions and answers. I will now administer the oath. Members of the administration, please raise your right hands. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
I affirm.
Is that everybody? Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Drum, Chair Carnegie, and members of the Finance and Housing Buildings Committee. I'm Sheriff Joe Facito, and I'm joined today by City Register Annette Hill. I hope all of you are staying healthy and safe during this time in the city. My testimony today will quickly review the history of the Sheriff's Office deed fraud investigations, describe our current efforts in this area, and advise New Yorkers on how to protect themselves from deed fraud. I will also discuss our public outreach efforts, as well as proposed legislation to update and strengthen deed crime laws. So now for a little history. Since 2014, the Department of Finance and City Register and Sheriff's Office have taken many proactive steps to reduce deed fraud and investigate crimes related to deed fraud. Our investigations in the past 6 years have resulted in the arrest of 49 suspects tied to fraudulent property transactions. The total value of these properties was in excess of $48,926,000. In addition, the Sheriff's Office provided testimony and evidence to the New York County Grand Jury report concerning deed fraud in New York City, issued in December 2018. The City Register is required by state law to perform the ministerial act of recording a deed as long as it is in recordable form, meaning that it is certified by a public notary, it has a seller's signature and a buyer's signature under certain circumstances, and it includes all other required legal documents. There is not much room for us to negotiate the law. We have trained City Register staff to better detect documents that may be forged or fraudulent and put in place a number of safeguards, including the involvement of the Sheriff's Office in the review process. After an internal review of our recording process, we discovered that quitclaim deeds are the type most often used by perpetrators of deed fraud. The staff now pays particular attention to these submissions. When there is a discrepancy identified that appears to indicate possible fraud, it is referred to the Sheriff's Office for review. Examples of other types of recordings that would trigger an additional review are those with a sale price far below market value, multiple transfers between LLCs in a short period of time, and transfers by people or entities suspected of committing or known to have committed deed fraud in the past. These safeguards have been in effect since July 2014, when we increased our focus on deed fraud. In addition, as part of the review process, City Register staff verify the notary information on the New York State Attorney General's official website, and discrepancies are sent to the sheriff for closer review. We also automatically inform property owners by mail when a deed is filed against their property. The quicker someone catches fraudulent activity, the quicker the problem can be addressed. To talk a little bit about the present landscape and challenges. As indicated in the New York County District Attorney's Grand Jury report, deed fraud is an onerous crime to investigate, and the more hurdles we face, the longer it takes to successfully complete an investigation. This year's bail reform has accelerated the disclosure process and now requires much more evidentiary documentation to be ready before trial. This is not impossible to accomplish, but it extends investigative timeframes considerably. In addition, this year, the Sheriff's Office has been more involved in the enforcement of many criminal and health processes resulting from cash bail reform and the COVID-19 pandemic. It should surprise no one that COVID-19 has presented additional challenges to deed fraud investigations. Grand juries were not in panel for months, leaving information gathering by the grand jury process stuck in neutral. Many law, real estate, and title company offices were closed in response to pandemic. Interviews with potential witnesses and suspects required significant acrobatics, and virtual interviews present numerous challenges to investigators. However, please know that these hurdles have only slowed but not stopped our progress. As an illustration of our work in spite of these challenges, the Sheriff's Office concluded a recent deed fraud investigation prosecuted by the Manhattan District Attorney into an attorney who committed deed fraud against the estate of a Tuskegee Airman. When the defendant pleaded guilty to all 11 counts of the indictment on January 13, 2020, the judge promised the defendant a sentence not to exceed a 6-month split on all Class D and E felonies and probation on the Class C felony, provided the defendant complied with certain conditions. On October 7th of this year, the judge, influenced in part by COVID-19, sentenced the defendant to 5 years of probation on all 11 counts and ordered the defendant to complete 200 hours of community service by February 2021. Make restitution of $25,000 to the victim's estate, sign a judgment for the remainder of the $67,122 stolen from the estate, and sign judgments for the full amount stolen from the New York State Department of Labor in the amount of $10,220, and from the defendant's sister, $31,577. The court also signed a stipulated order voiding the deed to the property. The defendant provided an affidavit withdrawing and or not pursuing notices of appeal in the 2 civil cases involving the property. While this case was successfully prosecuted, we should be mindful that during the COVID-19 crisis, jail will not be a viable deterrent for nonviolent crime. This is not to criticize the court or its determination, but to highlight that we want to reduce circumstances of people in jail during the age of COVID-19. How New Yorkers can protect themselves from deed fraud. The best use of my public testimony is to educate people on how to prevent deed fraud. Here are some important measures the public can take to protect themselves. Review your property records annually for activity. This information is available on our website through the Automated City Register Information System, commonly referred to as ACRIS, where you can view property records. The address is www.nyc.gov/ACRIS, ACRIS. Register for Notice of Recorded Deed Program. Once you register, you will be notified text or email when there's any activity on your property. It's free and you can register online at www.nyc.gov/finance, search deed fraud and choose the first result. Protect your property from deed fraud. Check with the Department of Finance if you stop receiving property tax and water bills, or if any of your utility bills suddenly increase. You can contact us by calling 311 or creating an account at www.nyc.gov/DOF account. If you own a property in New York City that is not occupied, we recommend that you check it often to make sure it is not illegally occupied. If you're going away for a long period of time, ask someone you trust to check on your house regularly while you're gone. Have them collect your mail so it does not pile up, as this suggests to criminals that the house is unoccupied. If you are going away for a long period of time, be careful of people or organizations that offer you cash to help you with loan modifications or foreclosure prevention. Never turn over your deed or transfer ownership of your home to a mortgage assistance company. Do not sign any property-related documents that you do not understand. We encourage people to first consult with a trusted attorney before signing papers. Do not hire a lawyer referred to you by someone who might have a vested interest in the property, such as a realtor. From our investigations, perpetrators of deed fraud operate like a gang. They have their own attorneys, mortgage bankers, notaries, title companies, and real estate brokers. Use a title company that you have vetted for real estate transactions, and make sure your title insurance has deed fraud protection. If you suspect deed fraud, act quickly. Do not be embarrassed or wait to get help. The more time that passes, the more difficult it may be to regain the legal title because of how quickly the property can be transferred, perhaps multiple times. File a complaint with the New York City Sheriff's Office. You can call us at 718-707-2100. It's important that we open a criminal investigation as soon as possible. You can also email the sheriff at taxcop@finance.nyc.gov. Hire an attorney to help you regain legal title to your property, and check to see if your title insurance policy covers deed fraud. This could help cover the costs associated with hiring an attorney. If you cannot afford one, contact the New York State Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office works with partners to provide free assistance to homeowners throughout the state. Their website is www.agscam.help.com. I'm going to talk a little bit about our public outreach and education. The Department of Finance Outreach Unit has been informing event attendees about deed fraud and how to prevent it since early 2016. Their work has reached over 100,000 taxpayers at over 1,500 events. During the outreach sessions, we give presentations which include a section on deed fraud and what people can do to protect their properties. The outreach team has distributed tens of thousands of our deed fraud guide, which is available at www.nyc.gov/finance, FINANCE, in 10 languages. The outreach unit attends deed fraud educational forums hosted by elected officials and community leaders. One example that we consider the ideal model was a town hall promoted as "Don't Lose Your Home to Scammers," hosted by Councilmember Cornegie and the outreach team and the Sheriff's Office. This event was co-sponsored by the Brooklyn Bar Association, the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, and Brooklyn Neighborhood Services. The outreach unit also conducts Train the Trainer sessions, hundreds of them over the past few years, during which they educate elected officials and community-based organizations on the topic. This is an ongoing effort, and we encourage members interested to contact us to schedule a session. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about proposed deed fraud legislation. Department of Finance, in consultation with the New York County District Attorney's Office, has prepared proposed state legislation to address the problem of deed fraud. The bill is consistent with and implements major recommendations of the New York County District Attorney's Office 2018 Grand Jury Report. One of the recommendations is for the bill increasing the penalty for the forging of a deed, mortgage, or similar instrument by making persons forging such instruments guilty of the crime of forgery in the first degree, a Class C felony, with a maximum sentence of up to 15 years of incarceration. The bill also dedicates the crime of filing a false instrument in the first degree to filing of a false real property instrument or the attempted filing of such instrument. It also makes the crime of filing a false instrument in the first degree a Class D felony with a maximum sentence of up to 7 years incarceration. The filing or attempted filing of false instruments other than real property instruments would be a Class E felony with a maximum sentence of 4 years of incarceration under a revised filing a false instrument in the second degree. The current crime of filing a false instrument in the second degree, a misdemeanor, would become a crime of filing a false instrument in the third degree. These increased penalties will act as a greater deterrent to deed fraud without being unduly harsh. The bill also creates a new group of crimes involving notarization because the deed fraud problem is inevitably enhanced by the lax or downright deceitful actions of duly commissioned notary publics and commissioners of deeds, as well as the deceitful actions of other persons who falsely purport to be duly commissioned notary publics and commissioners of deeds. The first of these two proposed crimes in the group notarization of a false real property instrument in the first degree and second degree address false, fraudulent, or improper notarizations of real property instruments. The first degree crime is a Class E felony. The second degree crime is a misdemeanor. The next group of proposed crime, impersonation of a notary public or commissioner of deeds on a real property instrument, deals with persons who falsely purport to be a notary public or commissioner of deeds in notarizing a real property instrument and is a Class E felony. The group's other two crimes are tampering with a notarization of real property instrument or the notarization journal in the first degree and second degree. These crimes will address situations in which a person alters or destroys a notarized real property instrument or a notarized journal or similar record that a notary public or commissioner of deed may be required to maintain. The first degree crime is a Class E felony. The second degree crime is a misdemeanor. Finally, in addition to the above amendments to the penal law, the bill also amends the executive law to authorize the city and any county outside New York City to, by local law, impose a journal and or similar record-keeping requirements on notary publics and commissioner of deeds with respect to notarization of a real property instrument. We hope this bill will become law so we and our partners can better investigate and prosecute deed fraud. I hope that our testimony today has given you some useful overview of where we stand in regard to deed fraud. Thank you for your time, and I will now take questions.
We will now open for questions from Chair Cornegie and Chair Drum.
Sheriff, thank you so much. It's always I feel like it's always good to see you, but when I see you, we're dealing with a very serious issue. So don't take that personal. But thank you for the work that your office continues to do.
Chairman, you're on mute.
On deed theft and deed fraud. I apologize. I would be remiss, though, before I go into questioning, if I didn't point out the great work that we've been able to accomplish in partnership with the current Attorney General and the prior Attorney General. When there was the mortgage foreclosure crisis and the restitution that the banks were required to pay, a great deal of that money was used to combat deed theft and deed fraud, and nonprofits around the city received that money. And now we don't have that as a resource when we need it most. So that's really unfortunate. And with a budget deficit, it's very difficult to allocate the appropriate resources to the nonprofits to help with the mitigation of deed theft and deed fraud. So we find ourselves in a double crisis. I just wanted to point that out. Some of the questions that I have begin with, hold on one second. So as it relates to victims of deed fraud, what are the common problems that owners who think they've been victims of deed fraud face in trying to quiet title?
One of the biggest problems that we see with the victims of deed fraud, although we can bring a criminal prosecution, gaining their title back becomes another hurdle in itself. And that is significant. That's why we say very early in the process, you should be represented by an attorney with any type of property transfer, because we oftentimes see people sign away their property on their own. And under those conditions, it's very hard to prove criminal intent. It can be done in very extreme circumstances, but as you know, the vast majority of complaints we receive are this type of fraud, where they took advantage of the person's lack of knowledge of real estate. They used that to their advantage, and then they had a financial gain over the victim. Then recovering the property after such a transfer is very, very difficult. So I would say that that's the strongest thing that any person could do, is when they're involved in any type of transaction, have good counsel available to them.
So also I want to, from your perspective, is there a particular demographic that's more vulnerable to deed theft and deed fraud? And I don't mean that in ethnicity solely. I mean it in socioeconomic status. I mean it also in age.
Absolutely, absolutely. We see on a continual basis, the elderly are particularly vulnerable to deed fraud. The immigrant community, because of the language barriers that are sometimes presented. Obviously, people who are suffering from in an economic crisis are more vulnerable to being asked to participate in things that they think are going to relieve them of their debt, but in fact relieves them of their property. So you have touched on each of the points, and the overwhelming number of cases that we deal with have those factors involved. In fact, the Tuskegee Airmen case that we were dealing with is a perfect example. Elderly gentleman, and later on, it was not only the gentleman, but his estate. Those are the factors that we see over and over again. The elderly, the vulnerable, the immigrant community, the people who are suffering in economic crisis. Those are the targets of deed fraud.
Also, I see Annette shaking her head. You can feel free to jump in at any time if you want to expound on what the sheriff has said, and if you have anything, please feel free.
Chair Cornegy, maybe just to ask the sheriff if he has any statistics on those demographics.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sheriff. Danny, Chair Drum.
We don't keep official statistics, but I review every deed fraud case, and that is the factor that I see in each one of these. That we see the elderly, we see some, when we look at the interview notes, we see the same factors involved. There are people, obviously, very expensive properties are also subject to deed fraud, but the average complaint that comes in has those factors: the elderly, the immigrant, the person that was approached because they're in economic crisis. Those are the overwhelming, particular to Brooklyn as well. Brooklyn, it has the overwhelming number of deed fraud cases, and those are the factors we see particularly in Brooklyn.
Southern Queens, is that similar?
We see Southern Queens as well, but obviously Brooklyn, as far as the number of complaints come in, Brooklyn is in the lead.
Thank you.
The one thing, Sheriff, I may have missed you mentioning in terms of tools in the toolbox to be preventive is the use of the ACRIS system and the ability to check any movement on your deed or any movement on those kinds of things through checking the ACRIS system regularly. In the past, we've all suggested, you included, that people check the ACRIS system to see if there's any movement as often as possible to secure or to be preventive in anyone laying claim to their deed or changing their deed or anything like that.
Absolutely correct. You should check on your own. Finance does have a process that we will send notification if there's anything recorded against your property. And that's a very important component to our investigation. Some of our investigations that we're getting in the beginning of this year were triggered by those types of notifications. And then we also have the relief factor. Some people get a notice, they don't know what's going on, and then they understand that they took a second mortgage and that's what's being recorded, or something that did involving their property that they were aware of. They're noticed that it's affected their real property. So in some cases, it puts people at ease to know that, yes, this was recorded. In other cases, it's an alert factor for us to start an investigation.
So I just want to be clear on what you're saying. The system as it stands now, when there's any movement, there'll be an alert sent. And,
yes.
and the homeowner will be able to verify whether that is something that they wanted or something that's fraudulent.
They receive a letter that outlines that there was a recording against their property. And if they're unaware of it or they're uncertain, that they can contact the sheriff's office, and it gives our phone number and our email address for them to contact us.
Is there a specific action that triggers that, or any action on the deed?
I believe it's any recording against the property. So if somebody files something against your property, it could be even like a mechanic's lien or something like that where it's recorded. Any recording on your property results in this triggering mechanism.
So I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I'll go to my co-chair and the rest of the members. But what tools does the city have in place to respond after an illegal real estate conveyance has already occurred? And I think you already mentioned how difficult it is to reverse that.
Yes.
Like, it's so easy. It's almost easier to do something fraudulent than it is to reverse it.
Absolutely correct. So the sheriff's response, the primary response from the sheriff is to investigate and see if we can develop a criminal case to bring for prosecution. That is the bulk of what we can do. There are some minor efforts that we have taken in other directions. So when we have an open investigation, if we have seen that the parties were going to move for an eviction and we had strong evidence that the eviction was unlawful because the transfer was unlawful, we have made appearances at housing court to see if the people testifying would perjure themselves under oath and arrest them for that. And what we discovered was when we appeared in housing court, the individuals would withdraw their housing court eviction process. So we have taken small steps. It's hard to kind of step into that realm because we can only do this in a very limited circumstance with active criminal investigations. We have strong evidence that the property was stolen. After the fact, if you hire a civil attorney can get a court order converting the property back to you, and the court can order the sheriff to convey the property back to you by deed, but it requires a court order. The sheriff can't do it on his own. So you really don't have a lot of options, and the city doesn't have a lot of options. As you said, once the property's been transferred and once those mechanisms are in place, it's very hard to undo.
You know, I think it's incredibly gutsy that people would steal your property and then evict you on top of it.
Yes.
Do you know what the percentage of that type of conveyance is in relation to all of the other deed theft?
It's small compared to the ones that we've investigated, but when we've spotted it, we've stepped into it, and we've gotten involved with the eviction process when we have strong evidence that this was going to happen. The other thing that we noticed in these investigations was that the perpetrators would have different sets of attorneys. They would have one set of attorney in housing court, one set of attorney for Supreme Court, one set of attorney somewhere else. So each attorney could deny knowledge of anything else. They were only hired for this very limited window. Remember, there are a lot of legitimate attorneys there that could be hired and not realize they're taking the act, they're acting on behalf of somebody who's involved in deed fraud. So we noticed that that was a trend where they use different counsels to perform different types of functions.
So my last question for this round is, I've gotten 3 texts already about the question of, is there a particular demographic that's perpetrating these crimes? Well, we asked the demographic of who's the victim. Is there a particular demographic, or can you narrow it? Have you narrowed it down to a particular segment of society that is largely responsible for these conveyances?
I couldn't say. You have all variety of individuals that are involved. The perpetrators are much more diverse than the victims.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for this round. We will have a second round, and I'll lead off that second round. I defer now to my colleague and co-chair, Finance Chair Danny Dromm.
Thank you very much, Chair Cornegy. And Sheriff, it's good to see you again. So if I'm hearing you correctly, correcting deed fraud is kind of like a warning about marriage. You know, it's a lot easier to get married than it is to get divorced. So I just wanted to make that point. We've been joined by council member. Go ahead, Sheriff. I thought you were going to say something. We've been joined.
I was going to say, instead of using the marriage analogy, use the boat analogy. It's much harder to get rid of a boat than acquire a boat.
Right.
I don't know which one of those hurt more, but a divorcee. Those are 2 terrible analogies.
We have been joined by council members Van Bremer and Miller.
I'm sorry, and also Barry Gudenchik has been with us from the start. Hey, Barry.
Okay, good. Sheriff, are you seeing any uptick in deed fraud complaints or suspicious deed filings as a result of the COVID-19 crisis?
Actually, we see a lower amount. We compared to the other years, we've seen lower amounts. But from the review of the evidence, and again, these are the early phases, we see some more truer criminal activity. We often get complaints, as I explained earlier, we get many complaints where people feel they've been defrauded. And I would categorize it, for lack of a better word, there's things that are sleazy but legal, and there are things that are truly criminal. We see a lot of sleazy activity, a lot of it. This year, we see a smaller volume complaints, but we're seeing what we believe is more evidence of criminal activity. As you indicated, because of the things that are happening with COVID-19, I think people think we're not watching. So this is why it was so important for grand juries and the court system to get back running, because it means that we can start moving our investigations forward.
Okay, thank you. At the past finance hearings, the council has heard from advocates that properties that are noticed for the lien sale are often targeted by fraudsters posing as distressed property consultants. While we recognize the benefits of widely publicizing the lien sale list, is there anything that the administration can do to protect these homeowners?
This is a typical question because obviously, as you know, the lien sale is part of a ministerial process. But any tool, no matter how helpful it is, can always be used for evil. A hammer is a great tool, except when you hit somebody in the head with it. It's not a great tool. The problem with the lien sale, the problem with ACRIS, all this information is there to be helpful to people, but it can also be exploited. And that's one of the great difficulties that we're facing. Good tools being used for bad reasons. It's very hard to find an answer to it because information is important. And I think if Annette has anything to say, let her jump in. I don't know if she does.
No, you said exactly what I was thinking. Thanks, Sheriff.
It's good to see you too, Ms. Hill, and maybe you can even help us with the next question. Based on our understanding, because of state law restrictions, the city register has very little discretion about whether to record a document related to property, even if there is a suspicion of fraud. Can you walk us through the process of how a deed is recorded with the city register? What are some of the most common indicators during the registration process that fraud may be occurring? And what do you do if you suspect that there is fraud?
Sure. Good afternoon. Well, like you said, I have very little room for rejecting a deed. However, the staff is trained to look for certain things. Like I said, we do, Joe, the sheriff reported, we check the notary information. If we find there's something there's something inaccurate with the notary information, that's something that triggers us to send it to the sheriff for additional review. We also look to see, we have flags in the ACRA system that alerts the staff of certain types of inconsistency. If the property is below market value and is being transferred and it's below the market value, that's a trigger. We also look to see if there is a property that has LLC and it's been transferred a few times. That's something that triggers us that something's going on. We also will look to see if there's a quit claim deed. That usually triggers that something's going on. So any kind of inconsistency we find, we will bring in the sheriff to take a second review and will not record it at this point. Working with the sheriff has helped us to not put something on record that could actually have someone lose their property. So it's been a very good relationship in inserting the sheriff into part of the review process.
Can you just walk me through the process of how?
Sure,
it's
yes.
recorded?
Okay, so we could get a recording over the counter in person. They could also mail it. We also get recordings electronically. 80%, almost 80% of the documents we get comes in through the electronic means. So very few people are now walking in. When it comes in initially, there's a quick review to just make sure it has the initial requirements such as tax forms, has all the requirements, the cover page, and then it goes through to the examiner. The examiner is examining to make sure it meets the legal requirements, that if they've made their payment, there's a buyer and a seller, it's notary, it's notarized, and so forth. That's the general process. And if everything meets the requirements, then it gets accepted if there's a payment for a recording.
If someone suspects fraud, what do they do? How do they go about that?
If someone suspects, if we get someone calling in or they're asking or they come into the office, the first thing we'll tell them is, number one, they should get an attorney. And the number two, we send them to our sheriff's department. We will pull a record of their property and we'll show them the last recording deed. We'll give them that evidence. They could also pull it themselves, but we will give them all that information and direct them to the sheriff so the sheriff can work with them to see if there's any criminality involved.
And Sheriff, what investigative tools do you have, or what do you use to investigate suspected cases of deed fraud?
We use everything that we have. That's the easiest way to put it. Besides the interview process, besides all of our programs and information, we've used our license plate reader technology. We use the video system that we have in the Department of Finance. We use a lot of other types of mechanisms, including GPS tracking warrants. If we've actually gotten to the point where we want to track someone, we've gotten permission from the district attorney, we obtain a warrant, and we tracked individuals involved in deed fraud. So we use any tool that's available for any of our criminal investigations are available for deed fraud.
Okay.
Thanks.
I just wanted to add one other thing that we do if the sheriff has opened the case with the district attorney and there's evidence, we will put a stop on ACRAS to prevent any additional recordings against the property. But it has to come from the sheriff saying that he has a very strong case. So if it's just that will stop them from either taking a mortgage out. If they come to try to record something, they'll have to contact us and then they're referred to the sheriff. So that's another tool we use within finance to try to stop further action against the homeowner.
Okay, thanks. And you had mentioned LLCs, which have historically been afforded privacy and secrecy about their owners, and for this reason have often been used to perpetrate deed theft and fraud. In September 19, state law changes forced new disclosure when an LLC is involved in the deed transfer of 1 to 4 family homes. Now, the name and address of all owners must be attached to the real property transfer tax form or the RPTT form. Do you review the RPTT tax returns as part of your anti-fraud review? And if so, do you believe this state law change has been beneficial for your investigations?
For the sheriff's side, yes. We look at, whenever we get a referral that there's something related to deed fraud, we look at the entire package. The reason that we look at the entire package, as the district attorney's grand jury report indicated, deed fraud is onerous to investigate. We may not be able to prove the theft, but we can prove that they lied on certain documents. So the RPP tax return, any of the other documents that are notarized, we may be able to charge someone with forms of perjury or filing false instruments, even if we can't necessarily prove the deed fraud component. So yes, that's an important part, and knowing who the principals behind the LLC are is very important. It takes a significant amount of time off the investigation if we know who they are.
So are there any tax privacy issues that prevent you from looking at RPTT returns during your investigations?
Not on our returns. There's no confidentiality on that. We can't look at regular tax returns and use that information.
Okay. We've heard that the comprehensive notary reform could be very helpful to help stop deed fraud. Some states have moved faster than New York to update their notary laws, including California, which has required notary journals since 1973, and more recently, Virginia and North Carolina. Some states have felt such urgency about these issues that they've changed notary law by executive order, including Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Have you had conversations with state representatives about moving something forward in this regard?
Yes, we've been advocating. We were advocating over the last several years some changes in the notary laws, but when we did the grand jury report with the DA, we felt that we should join forces and push as a joint in unison, saying these are the changes that we should be looking for as far as a notary, as far as making sure there are more increased crimes for notaries that are involved in this, keeping better records, particularly for real property transfers. And if necessary, part of the issue, to be honest, is many parts of the state are not interested in this legislation. However, we're trying to convince people if the rest of the state isn't interested, New York City is interested. It's a major problem for New York City. And these are things that we would love to see in New York City to help reduce deed fraud, having the notary be more responsible in the process.
So would you blame that lack of interest as the reason for it languishing in New York State legislature?
I think that upstate, the issue of deed fraud is not as prevalent, and there are other issues involving how much intrusiveness the government shall have in a person's life. So I think those issues tend to slow it down in the other parts of the state, whereas here in New York City, we see this on a regular basis, and we think it has a lot of value to help reduce deed fraud.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask a few more questions, and then we'll turn to other council members. But in fiscal 21, the adopted budget headcount for the office of the sheriff was 268 positions, with the actual headcount of 236. Is your office subject to the hiring freeze?
Well, at this point in time, we have openings, but we've not been able to hire. We've been trying to work with OMB to move forward in the hiring process, but we have to be realistic. The budget in the city right now is difficult to predict. And I'm sure there are many other city agencies like myself that have very valuable programs, but we're kind of in a waiting mode.
So at this point, do you think you're going to hit your head count, your budgeted head count this year?
No, we're below head count this year.
Okay, and how many staff members are assigned to work on deed fraud? And do you know their titles, what their titles are?
Yes. So we have two titles. We have actually three titles are involved in deed fraud: the deputy sheriff title, the criminal investigator title, and the auditor title. Each one of them does a certain component piece of it. We have approximately 7 investigators and I believe 6 deputy sheriffs and 3 auditors that are doing most of the deed fraud investigation. But that doesn't mean that those are the only people devoted to deed fraud. For example, if there's going to be an execution of the search warrant, we may bring in more deputy sheriffs to conduct the search warrant. In the county officers, where people walk into, let's say, the registrar's office and they have a deed fraud. Annette's team will actually bring them over to the sheriff's office. And the sheriffs in those counties, even though they're not primarily assigned to deed fraud, will take the basic investigation. So it's a hands-on approach. Most of the sheriff's office operates that way. I think I've explained that before. We're a small agency, and unlike NYPD, which has very specific people assigned for 20 years to do the same task, we are generalists. Deputy sheriffs every day could be investigating deed fraud. They could be serving an order of protection. They could be transporting a prisoner, making an arrest. So every day has a combination of different duties that are assigned to them.
So do you feel that that's sufficient to handle the number of deed fraud cases that you're getting?
It's difficult to balance because every assignment the sheriff has is important. Deed fraud is a very important program. It's important to me personally, but so is our order of protection project. So is our apprehension of the people who are going through emotional distress pursuant to the mental hygiene law. Each of these are very, very important. I can't say one is more important than the other. I'm saying all of them are important. And with that in mind, we try to balance it out. And by the way, we also are, because we believe in many of the reforms going on, we are also the agency now doing electronic monitoring for the city, the pretrial electronic monitoring for the New York City. If you're arrested and going to jail, this is a new option that's available.
Okay, thank you very much, Sheriff, and thank you, Ms. Hill, as well. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And let's go back to Chair Cornegy. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. We've also been joined by Councilmember Torres.
Thank you. Janan, I don't know if you're keeping the stack on members that would like to ask questions.
Yes, I will now call on council members to ask questions in the order they have used the Zoom raise hand function. Council members, please keep your questions to 3 minutes, including responses. There's a second round of questioning. Council member questions will be limited to 2 minutes. The Sergeant at Arms will keep a timer to let you know when your time is up. First, we will be hearing from Councilmember Jonai and then Councilmember Rosenthal.
Starting time.
Thank you, Chairs Cornegy and Drum. Sheriff, thank you so much for that explanation of what challenges you have. But what are all of the measures and safety nets that you have in place seem to be after the fact, after the legal instruments have been signed, after they've been submitted, after they've been recorded, that you could perhaps pick up on, whether it be a missing form, all of the proper fees. None of that stops the transaction from occurring. And my question to you and to Ms. Hill, wouldn't it be easier for any legal instrument requiring a deed transfer or a lien or a mortgage that is placed on a property require attorneys to sign off on that transaction?
It's possible. I defer to the city register because it sounds similar to another type of filing system that's in place in other jurisdictions. It's possible, but as you know, the last case that we prosecuted, the person that we prosecuted was the attorney involved in the transfer. So we do find that in the deed fraud industry, attorneys, notaries, real estate agents, they're all part of it. So having an attorney necessarily sign off on it will not guarantee any preventive measure that there won't be deed fraud. But I'll let Annette speak to other types of filing protections that exist in the country.
Before you answer, Ms. Hill, because you need two attorneys, an attorney representing the buyer and an attorney representing the seller. And at that point, both attorneys have a responsibility to make sure that their respective clients, as well as the other client, is of sound mind, is doing this of their own will in accordance, and putting that burden and responsibility on the attorneys to make sure that they also get title insurance, which is another component here. So I'm just offering a thought that I'm not understanding why this is so complicated when I think we have options that are going to be easy to prevent any fraud. It may be a bit expensive, but attorneys and title insurance would go a long way in preventing these frauds, whether they be through the attorney or unscrupulous individuals. Sorry, Ms. Lynn.
Yeah, I have to agree with you that yes, there are having an attorney does help it, but often the people who come to us at a party of deed fraud, sometimes it's the same attorney representing both parties, and that's because they haven't gotten their own attorney. That's the other thing is state law for recording requires the notary to validate who's in front of them. Again, oftentimes we see the notary. We've had many cases where we referred to the sheriff where the notary was part of the fraud. So yes, I do agree that having something up front would be better, but the nature of the way the recordings are, the people who are there to protect often are in times involved in that fraud.
Right, so going after whether it be the notary or the attorney and holding them criminally responsible would go a long way to prevent the fraud from occurring originally.
Yes.
But chairs, maybe we should be looking at this from a different angle. Holding those, like attorneys that are licensed, they're supposed to be acting in the best interest of their client, and the notaries responsible for any action that is led to a fraud. And if they're participating in the fraud, hold them accountable for not doing their due diligence to confirm that the transaction is legal, it is proper, that both buyer and seller are represented, and requiring no deed transfer should ever occur without an attorney.
So thank you, Mark. I would agree that, so I guess the caveat there is without an attorney on both sides.
Yep. That would counter, that would create a checks and balance for an attorney that has ill intentions. And I'm not aware of, Chair, we know we have credit protections on our credit cards. We don't have a mechanism in place that protects deed transfers or liens or mortgages taken out against properties. Maybe this is another avenue that we should be pursuing, where we allow these independent credit agencies not to allow a transfer or a lien to be placed on a property until they've confirmed it.
Well, legislative change is only something the sheriff can recommend. It's beyond our ken to actually make any change. The legislative body has to do this. As far as the attorneys, it sounds very sound to have two viable attorneys present, but I'm sure there will be people who object that they want to purchase or sell property without an attorney being present, or they can't afford one. I know it's foolish to move forward without proper representation, but the issue is forcing representation may not be viable.
It's a legal document. You should be required to have an attorney that represents you. And if you can't afford one, then perhaps the city should provide an attorney that charges reasonable fees, which would empower the Sheriff's Department, the Department of Finance. Again, it's just a thought.
Something to examine. No idea is a bad idea.
So actually, Mark, that's something I'd like to work on with you to see if it's in our jurisdiction as a local municipality to enforce something like that, or that's federal. But I'd love to work with you on that, Mark.
Thank you, Chair.
Next, we'll be hearing questions from Councilmember Rosenthal, followed by Councilmember Miller.
Starting time. Thanks so much, chairs. Thank you so much, Sheriff, and to your office for the hard work that you do. I do want to sort of follow up on what Councilmember Jonai was talking about. You mentioned that you automatically inform property owners by mail when a deed is filed against the property. If someone were to open up their mail, read that, and realize that, hey, that I'm not involved. Who the hell's, filing against my property? What would be their next steps? And is that enough to stop the sale from going through?
It's not enough to stop the sale from going through because we'd have to investigate it. An example would be like if the bank is foreclosing. Let's say it's a legitimate mortgage and the bank is foreclosing and they file some type of notice with the register, or your landscaper files some type of lien against you because you didn't pay a bill. Those things could trigger a notice that could be sent to someone. It's just a filing that there has been some type of filing against your property. It's the only way to alert you that something was filed with the register.
Right. This says specifically when a deed is filed.
But it's other types of filings will trigger something as well.
I'm talking about a deed.
Right. Once we get the complaint, the person calls up, we get the complaint, we have to start looking at it. There's many complaints we get complaints from individuals that say they were the victim of deed fraud, and it turns out they were a person that perpetrated a deed fraud. So we do want to look at every complaint and understand what's going on. Look at the history of the property. It doesn't happen instantaneously. And then once we see that there's no connection between the person that filed this and the person who's claiming this, that starts building the case. And then that leads us to interviews that could lead us to, we feel so strongly about it, the quicker we'll move on it. If it's something that we have somewhat of a cloudy piece of evidence, we need to build more evidence. And that's what takes a lot of time, building that evidence.
Got it. So the city itself brings the lawsuit. Like the person who lost their deed doesn't even have to bring the lawsuit because the city is going to file a lawsuit about the fraud?
No. The city doesn't bring any civil action against the party in these matters. What the sheriff does is look for criminal activity and look to see if the transfer of the property, if any component of this transfer was criminal activity. And then we look at it and say, okay, this is a crime, that's a crime. We add up the crimes, we try to get evidence, we speak to the district attorney. The DA kind of agrees, yeah, Sheriff, I see
expired.
And then we move forward.
Okay, so then the DA, sorry, Chairs, just if I could just finish this real quick. Then it's the DA who pursues the case. So again, I'm sort of getting at, but not the homeowner. I mean, the homeowner would be a party, obviously, the old homeowner. No, someone's really shaking their head no. I'm just trying to look out for somebody who gets a piece of paper in the mail that says a deed has been filed against your property, you no longer own it. And then somebody calls Department of Finance, what the heck? And then you investigate, and let's say a month later, I'm making it up, your finding is totally criminal, completely criminal activity. This is fraudulent. So then you give it to the DA to prosecute, but then Paula is trying to write something. I'm going to pin her. But anyway, wait, no, put it back. Put it back. I was just looking at it. The owner must also file a civil action. Okay, so the owner also has to do it at the same time that the DA may be prosecuting criminally.
So without getting too expansive, there's a criminal approach and there's a civil approach.
Yeah, you mentioned that. That's okay. Got it. Yeah. I'm just, it happened to a constituent of mine. And, you know, it's such a drawn out, it was a 3-year horrible process. And one of those that was clearly fraudulent. And that happened before the law went into effect, where now DOF sends out that letter. So she didn't even find out about it. But anyway, okay. Thank you so much, chairs. Appreciate your help.
Thanks, Helen.
Next, we will hear questions from Councilmember Miller, followed by Councilmember Adams.
Starting time.
Councilmember Miller? You're on mute, brother. Can we go to Adrian and then go back to Danique? Janan?
Sure, now we'll hear questions from Councilmember Adams.
We'll come back, Danique, as soon as you connect.
Starting time.
Okay, thank you. I will be brief. Sheriff, thank you so much for your testimony today. It's been such an education hearing from you today. So thank you so much. My question is very brief. It has to do with the proposed deed fraud legislation that's been proposed to the state. which I found to be fascinating. The line in your testimony says the Department of Finance, in consultation with the New York City County District Attorney's Office, has prepared proposed state legislation to address the problem of deed fraud. Has it actually been proposed to the state? If so, who's carrying the legislation, and what exactly is the status of the bill?
We have to get bill numbers and have it introduced, but this is one of the primary bills that the Department of Finance is looking to advocate for in the upcoming legislative session. It's a very important issue to us. As soon as we have that information, we will certainly share it with council.
Thank you so much, Sheriff. I found it to be very, very interesting. So thank you again for your testimony today.
Sure.
Just to piggyback off of Councilmember Adams, how can we as a council be supportive of that legislation on the state level?
Your normal legislative process would be what would be needed. Dialogue with the state legislature to express that deed fraud is a crime that it affects other jurisdictions, but it primarily affects New York City, like everything else, because of the volume of people we have, the nature of the number of realty transactions. So it's an important local crime. It's important for us. It impacts our citizens. And I think we have to express that to the legislative body, that how important it is for our residents at the ground level. These are people's homes. So this is something that we really kind of have to impress upon them. We were hoping that the weight of having finance, the sheriff, and the district attorney's office supporting the legislation would be very helpful. And I also wanted to shout out to ADA Jill Mariani. She's on this call. She has been instrumental in prosecuting deed fraud cases in New York County. She is a fantastic partner, and I can't speak enough and praise her enough for the type of work and dedication she's put into deed fraud. You really have an advocate in the DA's office with Jill Mariani, and I just wanted to bring that up.
Now, I agree. It seems, though, that there may be some actual civil rights issues here, too, because between Bedford-Stuyvesant, East New York, Southeast Queens, those are primary areas which happen to be an assault on African-American and people of color home ownership. So, obviously, Danique Miller, who, both the co-chairs of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus are on this call, and they probably could speak to us pursuing that as well.
I would believe that your legislative persuasion would be helpful with the Assembly and the Senate.
Is Councilmember Miller, have you gotten your audio together?
I think I'm waiting to be unmuted. Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted, Councilmember.
Okay, thank you so very much.
Just for the record, it wasn't me muting you.
No, I have this device of the phone and my desktop working that together, so that's me. Co-chairs, thank you for this important topic. Something obviously we've been talking about probably for the last 5 years. Sheriff, also something we've been working on. A couple of things. You indicated that this was something that was not you seen as being prevalent in the Southeast Queens community. Is based on not necessarily just data, but some of the complaints and what I have seen in my district, as well as Councilmember Adams and Richards, the opposite. Anytime you have a home ownership, particularly as the chair mentioned, Cornegie, seniors and folk of color, they have seemed to be low-hanging fruit in this area. Have you seen kind of a mobile net? If you don't see it in Southeast Queens or Queens now, do you have over the past 5 years? Is there any indication that there's a kind of a concerted a mobile network operating within the 5 boroughs at any time that is engaged in this type of activity?
Well,
or is it just individuals?
I don't know if my testimony was clear. I was indicating that Brooklyn just seems to have the highest amount of deed fraud. That doesn't mean that the other jurisdictions do not. Queens County has a significant amount of deed fraud complaints as well. As far as networks, yes. We see that deed fraud operates in networks. We have observed networks. We have networks under investigation where we have groups of people who are involved in different component parts of the deed fraud. You have realtors, you have attorneys, you have notaries, and you have other people that are looking at moving property. That network of people are involved in much of the deed fraud, and it is a network. And it takes a long time to gather the information and the evidence on a network. But yes, you are correct. They do operate as a network, and they do operate throughout the city.
So in terms of, we talk about fraudulent deed, in terms of transfer of property, what happens in the case where there's just been a name added to the deed without the consent? How would you say that's the same process because someone then notarized the fact that they witnessed this person agreeing to this person being added to the property as well?
I have to like look at each case individually. A name being added to a deed doesn't necessarily mean it was deed fraud. There could be a lawful reason for that transfer to occur. But we would look at if somebody brought us a complaint that a name appeared on the deed acquiring some type of interest, we would investigate it.
Okay, so I was referring to with someone without someone's consent. And then finally, Ms. Hill indicated that there is a process by which people come in and make a complaint and that they are often referred to the sheriff. Does this have to be very specifically the owner of the property, the person, the primary deed holder, or can it be a spouse, a child, a neighbor, someone who's concerned about these nefarious behaviors that are going on, particularly the seniors that are being preyed upon? The seniors have to make a complaint themselves.
Okay, yeah, I'll answer. Yes, it doesn't necessarily have to be the owner, but the owner will have to get involved if it move forward eventually. But we do have, especially for the elderly, sometimes it is a son, a daughter, it could be a sibling, it could be a spouse that could come in. So we will, it's public information what's about recording. So we will give the information and pull the information up for someone comes in, but we will tell them that the owner of the property needs to be involved if the case have to go forth with the sheriff.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, coaches, for this important hearing.
Thank you, Denise.
We will now hear testimony from Gilda Mariani, Senior Investigative Counsel in the Rackets Bureau at the New York County District Attorney's Office. Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Chairs Drummond Carnegie Jr. and members of the Committee on Finance and Housing and Buildings, thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. My name is Jill Mariani, and I serve as Senior Investigative Counsel in the Rackets Bureau. I also am a member of the New York State Attorney General's Task Force on Deed. There are few greater threats than being displaced from one's home. And shockingly, this can happen through property deed theft or deed fraud, as we know it, with the stroke of a pen or a click of a mouse. Deed fraud is not only harrowing to the victim, but it also affects the integrity of our real estate ownership system and real estate taxes, that substantial source of the New York City revenues, as you are aware. Notary publics are the gatekeepers. They connect the criminal activity, and thwarting the activity is far better than later prosecuting the activity. Now, this crime happens when fraudsters discover prized parcels by either scouring obituaries for recently deceased owners, or canvassing neighborhoods for unoccupied or dilapidated residences, or merely locating public deed property owned by older people. Now, the fraudsters then get control of the property through a variety of criminal means, including forging the owner's signature on the deed, or tricking the owner to sign the property over, or masquerading as a legal distributee, or transferring the property to one of many different types of entities, like a limited liability company, a series of shell companies, or a totally fictitious person. The fraudsters are then able to use the property as collateral for mortgages and loans, make renovations, extract cash for personal benefit, and they may even sell the property to a bona fide purchaser. The notary public is the gatekeeper poised to avert this most dastardly fraud, and that's where many of my comments focus on the resolution of 1427. Every document associated with a real estate transaction requires a notarization. This requires the notary public to positively identify the signer of the document by obtaining proper identification from that person. Now, virtually every fraudulent transfer involves a faulty notarization, either by a willing or an unwitting notary public. More brazen perpetrators even affix a fake notary public signature themselves by stealing and using a valid notary public stamp. Or they may lift valid notary commission information from public documents and Photoshop them onto new documents, or using the information about a public notary that is contained in the public filings and get phony public notary public real stamps from and those vendors are not required to verify the commission of the notary public. As you've heard, a New York County grand jury impaneled by the application of Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus R. Vance Jr. responded to a wave of deed fraud by issuing a first of its kind grand jury report in December of 2018, setting forth simple recommendations to combat this problem. One of the recommendations focused on deed fraud. Focused on a notary public relationship in the deed fraud. Among some of the things that they recommended, which are in resolution 1427, include requiring all notary public applicants to be fingerprinted as part of a background check and to file an official bond, which would establish that the applicant's true identity and include the applicant if he's been convicted of any disqualifying. It would also provide victims some measure of recovery for damages in cases of misconduct. The specific recommendations also included an increase in the level of education required to become and maintain the notary public appointment, and importantly, to institute new procedures that the notary public should follow in the exercise of official acts, including keeping a chronological and contemporaneous journal of all notarial acts, as you've heard the sheriff talk about. Now, to attack this problem, as you've heard the sheriff mention, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has joined with the sheriff's office, has drafted bill language to amend Penal Law Article 170 and 175 involving false property instruments, and drafted language that suggests adding a notarial offenses article to the penal law. And that would address what one of the council members mentioned about holding notary publics accountable specifically for impersonating or doing their role in this crime. That would do a lot to prevent what is happening. Since 2018, the Manhattan District Attorney has had a dedicated attorney focusing on issues of real estate, housing, and deed scams. And that person can be notified through the district attorney's financial frauds hotline at 212-335-9000. In closing, I'd like to say that the notary public stands in a pivotal position to thwart real estate conveyance fraud and to assist in bringing scammers to justice. With Notary Public Day being celebrated on November 7th in the United States, it is appropriate time to call for legislative review. The notary public must be viewed as the gatekeeper. Thank you for this opportunity.
So we will now take questions from Chair Cornegy and Chair Drum.
I believe that the sheriff and Ms. Hill will be leaving us at this point, if I'm not mistaken. So I do want to thank them for their coming in and for providing us with answers and giving their testimony. So thank you very much. And I think we're going to go to the public now. Unless Chair Cornegy has something
No,
Did
no,
you-
thank you, co-chair. Yes.
Yes, okay.
Before that, we'd like to open up questions to other council members in the order that they have used the Zoom raise hand
Oh, I'm
function.
sorry. Okay.
If there's no questions, we can move on to the public testimony. Okay, we will now turn to testimony from members of the public. I'd like to remind everyone that, unlike in our in-person council hearings, we will be calling individuals one by one to testify. Once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and the sergeant at arms will set the timer and announce that you may begin. Your testimony will be limited to 2 minutes. I would now like to call Joseph Sant from the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, who will be followed by Beth Finkel of AARP and Jenny Eisenberg of Brooklyn Legal Services. Mr. Sant, you may begin.
Starting time.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide testimony this afternoon. My name is Joseph Sant. I'm the Deputy General Counsel at the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. The center promotes and protects affordable homeownership in New York so that middle and working class communities are able to live in strong, thriving communities. We were established in 2008, and we've assisted over 74,000 homeowners. Our funders include the New York City Council, the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, the New York State Office of the Attorney General, and other public and private funders. I want to talk about the connection between deed theft scams and foreclosures. So the rise of deed theft in New York City is fueled by rapidly increasing home values and also by the fact that tens of thousands of New Yorkers are struggling to avoid foreclosure. And the negative effects of our ongoing foreclosure crisis are still felt citywide, but are seen particularly in communities of color, which were disproportionately targeted and harmed by predatory lending. Nationally, half of the collective wealth of Black families was lost during the Great Recession because of how much home equity contributed to their total net worth, and because predatory loans targeted these communities. And likewise, the Latino community lost an astounding 67% of its total wealth during the housing collapse. So I mention that because today the COVID-19 pandemic is pushing another wave of homeowners into financial danger. We have 10% of New York borrowers who are not current on their mortgages. That's an increase of over 120% compared to this time last year. So New York now has one of the highest mortgage delinquency rates in the nation, according to data available from Black Knight. Homeowners in trouble right now do have protections thanks to the Federal CARES Act and state banking law 9X, which allow them to forbear their mortgage payments. But those mortgage forbearance periods will begin
Expired.
to expire soon. And when those forbearances expire, we anticipate an increase in mortgage distress and foreclosure activity. And with that, a significant increase in deed thieves and mortgage rescue scammers. So I just wanted to make sure I highlighted that point, that as we see many more homeowners going into distress, we should see this becoming an even more acute problem. And thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now hear from Beth Finkel from AARP, followed by Jenny Eisenberg from Brooklyn Legal Services and Lucy Block from ANH.
Thank you very much.
Starting time.
Stated, I'm Beth Finkel. I'm the State Director for AARP. Really want to thank Chair Carnegie and members of the Committee on Housing and Buildings. AARP has over 750,000 members in New York City, age 50 plus, and as we heard before, older people are being targeted. So that's why we're here speaking about this and being supporters of this work. And also, as this overwhelmingly impacts New Yorkers of color, we've done a lot of work recently on disrupting disparities that I think many of you know about. And this is really at the heart of that work. It is well established.
Beth, can you hold on 1 second? I hear a ringing in the background. Does everybody else hear that as well? If everyone could mute themselves if they're not speaking, or if the host, Janan, if you can mute everyone. I don't know if that's your ringing in the background, Beth.
I do get flash alerts. I apologize for that. I gotta learn how to turn them off. I'm really
Okay, can we restore her time? I'm so sorry, Sergeant.
Thank you, sir.
Starting time.
So we know that the thieves are preying on people in Brooklyn and in South Queens. And these are gentrifying areas, and we're very concerned about that. The news headlines tell these stories. I know many of you have talked about victims. We've also talked to any number of victims in East Flatbush and Bed-Stuy. And we're very, very concerned about the 3,000 deep theft complaints that have been recorded in the city since 2014. I think we've all identified this as a crisis. Earlier this year, we were very happy to join with AG Tish James to launch the Homeowners Protection Program, which we will continue to be a part of because we know how important that is. We also know that the only way to really help these folks is to make sure that they get access to these top network of legal services in order to secure redress. We also are working with the New York State Attorney General's Office and the Department of Financial Services Division of Housing and Community Renewal and local law enforcement to look and depend upon this information from the HOP agencies. What I really want to just stress is that AOP is very pleased to support for the chair's resolution of 1429 and 1430, which respectively call on the state to enact legislation adopting more stringent standards around corporations' names that mimic those of government agencies and enact S 1253 A 6775, designating the county of Kings a cease and desist zone, as the chair spoke about earlier, providing homeowners with the means to effectively express their wish not to be solicited by real estate brokers or agents. There is so much work to be done here. I've shortened my testimony for the 2 minutes.
Time expired.
I tell you that ARP is very much committed to this work, and if all of you please feel free to call on us because we really want to be supportive. This is such important, essential work. So thank you all for your work.
Thank you, Beth, for your partnership.
Next up, we'll be hearing from Jenny Eisenberg of Brooklyn Legal Services, followed by Lucy Block of ANHD and Rosemarie Cantano of NILAG.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay? My name is Jenny Eisenberg. I am a senior staff attorney in the Foreclosure Prevention Project at Brooklyn Legal Services, which is actually a program of Legal Services NYC. And my testimony today is on behalf of Legal Services NYC, which is the nation's largest provider of free legal services to poor people. Since 2009, our foreclosure prevention projects have actually represented thousands of families across Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island who are at risk of losing their homes to foreclosure and real estate frauds and scams. We have substantial experience litigating, investigating these kinds of cases. I myself have quite a few on my docket active right now. And we have a pretty unique insight to lend to the committee and the council as a whole. So I did not realize that we'd only have 2 minutes today. And I just want to say briefly what our response is to the proposed legislation. I understand that there are 3 proposed resolutions, 2 proposed revisions to the city administrative code. The short answer to these proposals is yes, they're great. They would all likely add incrementally in the goal of reducing deep theft. The longer answer here, unfortunately, is that deep theft is complex and it's persistent. And we have there are broader measures that the council could actually take to address the problem. I think many of the speakers have already acknowledged the fact that the people who are most vulnerable to title scams on their property are people who've already been victimized by redlining, predatory lending, foreclosure, and now deed fraud. Increased funding for access to legal services would go a tremendous way towards improving people's ability to address these issues, because ultimately, as many council members have indicated, notifications are great, but then what? Who do you call? And that's why adequate funding for our network of not just legal services providers, but on the ground community grassroots housing counselors is really incredibly important. I also, if I could just take a very, very brief moment to address something that Councilmember Adams acknowledged at the beginning of the session, and that is the abolition of residential properties inclusion in the annual tax lien sale. Because when that lien sale list gets published, we are throwing those property owners to the wolves, and their property addresses are out there for all to see. It's something that we have consistently advocated around, and there is absolutely no reason why these properties need to continually be included on the lien sale list. Finally, and again, I understand my time is out, but because we are having so many conversations right now about criminal enforcement, I will say that I came before this committee almost 5 years ago, and I testified about litigation that I and my colleagues were handling involving one of the many scam outfits that are operating against our clients, and that's Homeowners Assistance Services of New York. I understand that Councilmember Cornegy was very interested in this case. I note that these cases have been referenced in the proposed legislation, and I'll say this. Everyone says it would be great to have a lawyer in these situations. I'm that lawyer, and I'm still handling this case almost 5 years later. And the FBI got involved, and people went to jail. There was a trial. People have testified in the Southern District. There are numerous resources that were devoted to that one case, making it highly unusual. And you know what? We are still fighting to get title back for these clients. So when we talk about, yeah, it would be great to have a lawyer, it would be great to have resources, I'm here to tell you that those resources are human beings, and we need money, and we need more staff, and we need more time. And we need for local law enforcement to be more interested in investigating and prosecuting these cases. We hear time and time again, and I know that these cases take a lot of time and they take a lot of energy, and that's true. But if they're too hard for local law enforcement to investigate and prosecute and work up the way that, street crimes get investigated and prosecuted and worked up, then we should prioritize that and devote resources and training and hiring and move in that direction. Because I also know, as we're having a national conversation about over-policing and reallocating criminal justice resources, let's note that these same communities who have been consistently victimized over and over and over again are also the same communities that are getting aggressively policed for street crime. And yet, many times I have had clients say that they reached out to local law enforcement and were met with not the most receptive audience. And not out of hostility, but because these are resource-heavy prosecutions. We understand that, but maybe it's time to shift priorities. I really appreciate everyone listening, and I'm happy to take more questions. My prior testimony was significantly more detailed than this, and I will supply that to the committee for reference as well.
Thank you, Jenny.
Okay, next we'll be hearing from Lucy Block from ANHD, Rosemarie Cantano from NILOG, and then followed by Jennifer N. Levy from Legal Aid.
Starting time.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Chairs Cornegy and Drum, and the committees on Housing and Buildings, Committee on Finance. My name is Lucy Block. I'm a Research and Policy Associate at ANHD, the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development. We're an umbrella organization of more than 80 members citywide who build community power for housing, economic, and racial justice. Many of our members work in communities where low-income Black, immigrant, and other homeowners of color, as well as their tenants, are at risk of losing their homes. Thank you to both committees for having this hearing on the very important issue of deed theft and deed fraud, and the interrelated issues of speculation, harassment, and displacement of small homeowners in New York City. I'd like to thank the previous speakers for bringing in all of these interrelated issues and talking about how this really needs to be understood and addressed holistically. So ANHD fully supports resolutions 1429 and 1430. We partially support resolution 1427, and we support introductions 1913 and 1919 with proposed modifications. I'm going to be talking a little bit about our research on foreclosures And then my more detailed testimony on and comments on those individual pieces of legislation are in my written testimony that I've provided. So the problems that are referred to in the proposed resolutions of aggressive and predatory solicitation to pressure seniors and homeowners to relinquish their homes, many times duplicitously, as well as outright fraud to illegally steal deeds, these issues have been occurring for many years. Our members, Cypress Hills Local Development Corporation and the New York City and the Center for New York City Neighborhoods know this because they've been working on these issues for many years to pass legislation to stop this from happening. Now more than ever, we're seeing that this is a really critical moment to enact these increased protections. So to understand this, I did some research on foreclosure filings in 2020 and examined how many foreclosure filings were happening during the worst months of the pandemic and what's been happening over time. I included some charts and tables in my testimony. So I wanted to mention that the number of foreclosure filings was below 100 in April and May, and below 200 in June and July, but it surpassed 400 in August. The number of filings jumped from 192 to 360 in small homes that are 1 to 3 units during those months. So the number of foreclosure filings are dramatically on the rise in recent months, which makes this really, really urgent. We're also seeing scheduled foreclosure auctions begin to tick up again. And as I said, there's more detailed information, data in my testimony, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Rose Marie Quintano from NILAG, followed by Jennifer M. Levy from Legal Aid, and Alexa Sloan for the Coalition for Community Advancement.
Starting time.
My name is Rosemary Quintano, and I'm the Associate Director of the Consumer Protection Unit at the New York Legal Assistance Group, where I've had the privilege for the last 10 years of representing homeowners in the 5 boroughs. Unfortunately, as we've heard many times on this call, deed theft has been a persistent problem in New York City. And unfortunately, the COVID-19 crisis is only exacerbating that situation. Homeowners who are desperate to keep their homes or to sell them to provide financial stability for their families are becoming the perfect target for unscrupulous real estate investors, attorneys, and notaries. It is often said that in crisis, the best come out in people, but unfortunately, it also brings out the worst. The opportunity to exploit those in dire straits is growing exponentially. The justifiable fear of the virus is being twisted by these charlatans for profit. For example, realtors are using the fear of individuals, telling them that living in cities is too dangerous, that they need to move out to the suburbs. At the same time, they offer to handle everything for the client, including finding a buyer who doesn't need to come into the house. Playing on the fear of having strangers traipsing through their homes during the pandemic, the realtor directs the property to their own investor at a highly discounted price, thus robbing people of the equity they've spent their whole lives accumulating. The house is not advertised on the multiple listing service, nor is the community as a whole able to see it. Therefore, there's no competitive bidding process. In many cases, the difference in price can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. On another level, because so many small homeowners are struggling with having tenants that are not paying their rent, these people are coming to their homes and saying, I can get them evicted for you. I can take care of this, but I can only do it if I'm the legal owner. And they have these homeowners sign their deed over, promising them that as soon as they get the tenant out, they're going to sign the house back over. Unfortunately, what happens is a few months later, it's the homeowners who find themselves in housing court being evicted. For these and all the other things that have been going on, we appreciate everything that the council is doing to help protect homeowners in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Jennifer M. Levy from Legal Aid Society, Alexa Sloan for the Coalition for Community Advancement, and Urbos Abdulamastu from the Fortune Society.
Starting time.
Jennifer? We can't hear you. Look, you want us to come back to you? You need to change your mic input. So. Okay, we'll come back to you after the next. The next we'll be hearing from Alexa Sloan.
Starting time.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alexa Sloan. I'm an organizer with the Coalition for Community Advancement, Progress for East New York and Cypress Hills. We are a movement of local tenants, homeowners, houses of worship, small businesses and community organizations in Cypress Hills and East New York who organize for real affordable housing, protections for tenants and homeowners, and new and good jobs for the East. My comments today are on the effects of an unregulated real estate industry on small homeownership and affordable rents in East New York and Cypress Hills. I'm here with other East New York Coalition members to ask City Council for greater protections and to see the Resolution 1430 passed. As many here know, East New York is a predominantly Black and Latino, a vibrant multiracial class community. And because of a banking and real estate landscape that has and continues to be hostile and exclusionary to Black and Latino people, small homeowners have had to fight and to pool resources to buy their homes. People worked very hard to save and overcome many odds to become homeowners. And and because of a banking and real estate landscape that has and continues to be hostile and exclusionary to Black and Latino people, small homeowners have had to fight and pool resources to buy their homes. Homeowners in East New York have formed block associations and engaged in grassroots community mobilization. The Coalition for Community Advancement formed in reaction to the East New York 2016 rezone. And in the last 4 years, the coalition has fought the unregulated real estate industry. In our conversations with homeowners, we hear stories weekly of activities verging on the criminal, testimonies of harassment, deed theft, and predation on the elderly and other vulnerable homeowners.
Time expired.
We know of countless people who've been contacted on a weekly and daily basis, emailed, called, door knocked by aggressive investors looking to purchase their homes. And we know that people under duress and provided with misinformation are selling their homes for wildly undervalued prices. Since the 2000 East New York rezone passed, we've been seeking to have dramatic protections such as the cease and desist zone for all of East New York. Petitioning for the zone has been a very long process, very laborious and very opaque. Since 2016, so in the last 4 years, the coalition has collected documentation of intense and repeated speculation by collecting flyers in the mail and logs for homeowners to record the calls and texts and visits homeowners receive from developers, real estate, and investors. But it wasn't until last year, with the support of State Senator Julia Salazar, did we learn there was an official survey homeowners could use. Last summer, we collected 500 surveys. We sent these surveys to the New York Department of State in September 2019. We had to wait 7 months until March of this year for a public hearing. At this public hearing, over 40 East New York homeowners testified to the terrible stories of deed theft, harassment, and repeated predatory speculative activity that have left many residents feeling forced out of their own homes. After March, we waited until July for the New York Department of State to post a proposed zone, which was a smaller area than the community had asked for. There was a public comment period that lasted 60 days, during which over 500 residents submitted public comments of support for a zone for all of East New York. And now we have to wait. But it shouldn't have been this difficult, nor take this long for homeowners to seek protections. The cease and desist zone is not a radical measure. If people want to sell their homes, they can still sell their homes. A cease and desist zone for all of Brooklyn is needed and is urgent. City Council, Committee on Housing, and Committee on Finance, Black and Latino and working class homeowners need more protections from predatory equity and from the unregulated real estate industry. New Yorkers needed a cease and desist zone, the Small Homes Anti-Speculation Act, and the abolishment of the tax lien sale yesterday. We need City Council to act now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Jennifer Ann Levy from the Legal Aid Society, Arbos Abzul Lamash from the Fortune Society, and Paula Siegel from the Tate Justice.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm sorry about that. I'm Jennifer Levy. I'm an attorney at the Legal Aid Society in Queens in the Foreclosure Prevention Department. The Legal Aid Society has been at the forefront of advocating for the rights of homeowners in the city, state, and local levels since 2000 through our foreclosure prevention and home equity preservation projects. Since its inception, we have assisted homeowners by challenging abusive lending and real estate practices in state and federal court defended homeowners in foreclosure actions, and since 2008, advocated for loss mitigation at court-mandated settlement conferences. Through our advocacy for homeowners in fighting to save their homes from foreclosure, we have seen countless homeowners fall victim of various kinds of scams and deed theft, seeking to profit from their homes. The foreclosure crisis has had a devastating impact on low-income neighborhoods, communities of color, the elderly, and it is these very same communities that have become targets of deed theft and related scams. Deed theft can take many different forms. We have seen everything from outright recording of fraudulent deed transfers without the knowledge of the homeowner to tricking homeowners into transferring the deed to their home to a scammer in the belief that they are applying for a loan modification. A more recent form of deed theft includes fraudulent short sales, which in particular has targeted seniors in foreclosure and those with reverse mortgages. The fact that foreclosures, mortgage, and property information are public and easily accessible online has made it easy for scammers to identify and target homeowners in financial distress. Homeowners of color, those who do not speak English as their first language, and especially our elderly homeowners, are constantly and aggressively approached by mail, phone, and in-person solicitations at their homes. Deed theft is not always committed by a large entity, victimizing hundreds of homeowners throughout New York City. Smaller size scammers who use a uniquely named LLC for each fraudulent deed transfer makes it even more challenging to detect. They often use the address of the targeted property as the name of the LLC. We often see individuals hiding behind LLCs with government or official sounding names. A particularly targeted population are seniors, especially those with a reverse mortgage, for which they have no personal liability, or a tax lien, which is of public record, showing that they may be in financial distress. I'm just going to give one case example real quick. A prime example is Miss D, an elderly homeowner with a reverse mortgage who fell behind in paying her property taxes and therefore was at risk of foreclosure. When she called her reverse mortgage servicer, she was incorrectly told that she owed the entire loan balance on her reverse mortgage, and her only choice was to sell her home. As a result, she fell victim to a real estate scammer who knocked on her door and made her believe that she was merely signing an agreement to list her house for sale. However, instead, she was tricked into signing a contract of sale to sell her house to an LLC for just $200,000 when her house was worth $500,000. To make it worse, that brazen LLC then brought a lawsuit for a breach of contract to force the sale. We commend the City Council on their efforts to address this serious issue, and we also would like to urge the City Council to support an expansion of the cease and desist zone beyond Brooklyn to areas such as Queens. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Erbos Abzu Lamashtu from the Fortune Society, Paula Siegel from Take Root Justice, and Avi Gross.
Starting time.
Hello. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. I signed up just to listen for information. Basically too poor to own any property. I'm living in a Fortune Society program. Thank goodness for that. But I didn't sign up for testimony. I'm learning in case I do become a property owner one day. I'm learning about the protections and different things. So I didn't know I was going to be on to testify, but I find this very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll be hearing from Paula Siegel from Take Root Justice, then followed by Avi Gross, and then followed by Richard Flatow.
Starting time.
Thank you so much. My name is Paula Siegel. I'm senior staff attorney in Take Root Justice. This is Equitable Neighborhoods practice. Thank you so much to the council, first of all, and the members who are here for helping us launch Take Root Justice in the hardest fiscal year that we have had in a very long time. The council's support in spinning off from our parent organization over the last year has been invaluable. So it's just really my gratitude to the members here today. I'm really pleased to be a part of this hearing, and it does feel like a follow-up to the hearing we had 5 years ago. Thank you so much, Sheriff, for the updates and the practices that have been improved in those 5 years, but I am really sad to say that a lot of things have not changed. And I'm going to focus my testimony on what Councilmember Adams rightfully pointed out as the shadow stepchild of deed fraud, which is the New York City tax lien sale. And I'm going to urge the members here who have the legislative power to just let the tax lien sale die. Let it be a bad memory, a bad Rudy Giuliani dream, and let this be the last year that the city publishes a list of homeowners and other property owners in distress that paints a bullseye on those vulnerable homeowners and gives property speculators a roadmap to who they might be able to fool into stealing their properties and whose properties they might be able to take without maybe ever interacting with anybody. As I told you about 5 years ago, in fact, in my practice, I have been encountering the worst of the deed thieves and the McConney brothers, who I think some folks here know. They discovered a property in Prospect Lefferts in Brooklyn on the tax lien sale list in 2003, purported to find some heirs of the deceased.
Time expired.
A Guyanese immigrant. We have gotten the district attorney's office involved. They declined the case. 2003 was much too long ago. The case is still going. We had to find the heirs. We had to help them find counsel. The city has actually acquired the property, and there's $2.3 million sitting in escrow with the court that should rightfully go to this immigrant family whose property this is, and that case is still being litigated. In the meantime, we have a new park in Prospect Lefferts. That's really great. I just want to thank the Councilmember Cornegy, particularly for his resolution 1429, addressing the names of corporations. Our friends, the McConneys, regularly use Housing Urban Development LLC, HPD LLC, and Queens LLC as their cover in these transactions, making it a very compelling trick for the folks they interact with. So I've submitted written testimony with a little bit more detail. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It's actually good to see you. And thank you.
Absolutely.
Honestly.
Thank you.
And next, we'll be hearing from Avi Gross, followed by Richard Flatow, followed by Linda Ford.
Starting time.
Thank you, Chairs Cornegy and Drum, for this opportunity. I am not going to read off written testimony, but I would like to share with you through my personal grievance, which has to do with fraud in affordable housing. I've become aware of thousands, that's the number, thousands of affordable deeds which were fraudulently transferred to privileged parties, for lack of a better word. And just going to give one example here. We have on the left side, you could see the city of New York. On the right side, Mohinder Bahanot. He received a property that's worth, affordable property with a market value of about $700,000 for the attractive price of $1,040. And that is one of thousands of examples. Now, Chair Cornegy, when I took this information to the relevant authorities, and again, there are thousands of affordable properties that were transferred for ridiculous sums. The answer I got really concerned me. And the answer was, well, maybe there was a lien on the property. Maybe that's why it was sold for such an attractive price. And to hear that from law enforcement, it sort of gave me the impression of this is why it's happening, because there's no enforcement to begin with. So if the perpetrators know that the answer will be, oh, well, we're not going to look into it, an affordable property was given for 1/100th of the price, then isn't that a great motivation for people to do this and continue to do this?
Time expired.
It just gives, I'm just going to give here another example. And as you could see here on all these deeds, these are all official signatures of Theresa Ward and Commissioner. So my plea to you, Chair Cornegy, I've been watching you for a long time. I know you are a person of integrity, and I know you care about the public. But the problem here is whoever has access to affordable properties is able to transfer them fraudulently. And I have thousands of examples for a fraction of the price. And unfortunately, these are people that have access to ACRIS and no one is watching over them. So I know you are a person of integrity. I know you wouldn't stand for this. The question is, how can we get this to stop? Public property is meant for the public, not for privileged parties to fraudulently transfer to themselves for a fraction of the price. And finally, if you want examples of any of the thousands of fraudulent deeds I've uncovered, I'd be more than happy to send them to you. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Avi. I'm going to have someone, if you could provide me a correspondence in the chat, somebody from my office will reach out to you in the next 24 hours. Thank you.
Next, we'll be hearing from Richard Plateau, followed by Linda Ford and Sarah H.
Starting time.
I also would like to thank Chairs Drum and Cornegy for holding this hearing. I didn't get on in the beginning, so I'm not sure, but I think I may be the only actual victim of property fraud. So I was a victim of a fraud that it's actually been tried. The case has been tried and a person convicted. They were involved with the ring that stole 6 properties. And I'm a beneficiary of the ACRIS notification. The way that I was able to get to this quickly and early on was the day after the person signed a fraudulent document. I got notified by ACRIS and I proceeded to make whatever noise I could. And I notified the sheriff's office and the DA. So I'd like to publicly thank Councilmember Cornegy for standing with me at a press conference in 2016, which helped to smoke out the perpetrator and bring him to justice. Since the time is so short, I'm just going to focus on a few policy recommendations, policy and legislative recommendations, just kind of reverse engineering what happened to me. So first of all, I'd like to say I'm fully in support of Reso 1427, as well as intros 1913 and 1919. I just have 4 policy recommendations. First one is that there should be a mandated notification of recorded property documents. I know right now people have to sign up. Second, there should be enhanced security of notary information. What happened in my case is that the notary was actually a fake. Somebody had stolen a notary stamp. So there has to be more security about that.
Time expired.
I'll just go over the last 2 and I'll submit written testimony. There should be increased penalty for fraud involving notaries, and then enhanced security integrity of the recording process. So I'll flesh those things out in written testimony, which I'll submit to the committees. Thank you.
Richard, I want to thank you for your testimony. And since you're here, I do feel compelled to say that as one of the more public and prominent figures within the Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights area, if it could happen to you, those seniors and people on ancillary streets and people who have issues around immigration, we got really, really concerned, because if people would be so bold and embrazened to attack yourself and your family, and I'm assuming they didn't know your family's history, but
no.
But it said to us very quickly that there were people out here who were doing it to people who weren't willing to come forward. Your willingness to come forward and not be embarrassed. I've met with people on several occasions who felt embarrassed by some type of fraud or them falling victim and were unwilling to expose their own trauma because of embarrassment or because of those kind of things. So I want to thank you for stepping forward and being an example. You helped us bring more people out into the forefront about the issues that they were facing because you were willing to put a face on it and a name to it. So again, thank you. Many more cases after yours, we were able to help mitigate because you were willing to stand publicly in a press conference and talk about that. So I know that couldn't have been easy to do. And thank you again for doing it.
Thank you. Just so people know, I'm a real estate broker. I'm also currently the chair of Community Board 3, and I'm a former president of a real estate board. And someone actually defrauded me. So thank you very much, Councilmember Cornegy and Councilmember Drum and all the other council members who are trying to tighten the regulations around property fraud.
Next up, we'll have Sarah H., followed by Randall Cobb and Jessica Franco.
Starting time.
Thank you.
Sarah? Are you there? Okay, we can come back to you. Next up, we have Randall Cobb, Jessica Franco, and Hannah Anusha.
Starting time.
Hello, could everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Randall Cobb. I live in the Bedford-Stuyvesant area of Brooklyn. I have been a victim of deed theft, and in more so other words, equity theft. I have been going through this battle for going on 7 years. I have been harassed, tricked, and just pretty much lied to, all seeking help from saving my home. It's been a very hard and difficult situation where, it's good hearing that these laws are out there, but in my case, which I have a very clear case of deed theft, that I am not getting any help whatsoever. I also contacted the DA, the AG office, and I am still waiting on them to respond due to my situation. And to no avail, no one has reached out to me in helping me. I need help. And I'm sure I'm not just speaking only for myself, but for others who have been in this matter. It's just been like a ring around. And yes, these laws are there, but they are not being enforced. Because why I haven't been helped? Everything is very clear and vivid of what I went through, but there is no help. And I'm just pleading for help.
Time expired.
Next, we'll be hearing from Jessica Franco, followed by Hannah Anusha from East New York Community Land Trust and Deborah Ack from East New York Community Land Trust.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Franco. My husband and I are first-generation first-time home owners. We purchased our home from an investor at about above market value rents of $600,000. The same home he had just recently purchased 6 months before for $190,000. Since then, we have received countless of letters, flyers, personal visits for offers for our home. Within a 5-block radius of our home, we have seen a rotation of 2 to 3 homes being for sale within every block. Home flipping is causing property value and property taxes to increase, making Cypress Hills, East New York, and Brooklyn completely unaffordable to working families. I have witnessed how my neighbors, especially our seniors, have been heavily harassed. Everything from being followed to the laundromat, to the supermarkets, to the post office, all in the go of purchasing their home and flipping it. We need to criminalize deed fraud. We need to stop home flipping that is causing displacement of working families, and we need to pass a cease and desist zone for all of Brooklyn. We need to be intentional about protecting and preserving communities and ending displacement. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Hannah Anusha from East New York Community Land Trust, Deborah Ack from East New York Community Land Trust, and Andrea Granville from East New York Community Land Trust.
Starting time.
Good afternoon, council members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Hannah Anusha, and I'm the staff coordinator for the East New York Community Land Trust Initiative, an organization of East New York and Brownsville residents who are dedicated to fighting displacement and taking community ownership of land. Like several people who spoke before me, I want to point out that this tax lien sale law has facilitated deed theft and deed fraud for decades. Speculators use the list of lien sale eligible properties to target people who are struggling financially or elderly and have fixed incomes. They prey on people in the lien sale list, and many homeowners are convinced to sell their homes, often for significantly less than the home's value. The East New York Community Land Trust and our partners across New York City recognize the lien sale law as a racist and unjust law, characteristic of its creator, Rudy Giuliani. The lien sale law expires at the end of this year. The last time it was renewed was in 2016. The City Council has a responsibility to let this law sunset and to work with communities that are most impacted to create a more just and equitable system for debt collection. So, to put it simply, renewing the lien sale law with small reforms is short-sighted and not acceptable. When we talk about a just recovery, about transforming an unjust systems in the wake of a crisis to build a more equitable economy, this is what we mean. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Deborah Ack from the East New York Community Land Trust, followed by Andrea Granville from East New York Community Land Trust, and Albert Scott, also from the East New York Community Land Trust.
Starting time.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Deborah Ack, and I'm a member of the East New York Community Land Trust Initiative. I also sit on the committee for the Education and Outreach subcommittee for that land trust. I'm here just to share a part of my experience with homeowners. No, I'm not a homeowner, I'm a renter, but it affects everyone when deed thefts take place. It affects the renters too, because the renters unfortunately are unaware of what's going on. But recently, I've had the opportunity to call about 30 people who were on this New York City tax lien sale register. I think that this register needs to be abolished along with the tax lien sale. With calling these 30 residents, they are very fearful because they do not know, first of all, who I am. I've had people accuse me of being a scammer, yell and scream at me, oh, you trying to buy my home from me. These people are just unaware of exactly what's out there for them. That they have been obviously reached by other people who have been trying to buy their home from them or threaten them in any kind of way. I mean, I've spoken to at least 30 people or more, and they just are not aware of any resources that's out there for them. So they have taken these notices that you guys say that you mail out to people, and seniors really don't understand what these notices are. So these notices are put up on the shelf. I think that the city council really needs to come up with a better ideal of how to go about reaching these tenants and having them truly understand exactly what is going on. I stand firmly with the Community Land Trust and all of our partners to abolish the New York City tax lien sale. So this way, this list will no longer exist and the homeowners will feel safe. Thank you.
How? I don't know.
Thank you. Next, we have Andrea Granville from East New York Community Land Trust, followed by Albert Scott from East New York Community Land Trust, and followed by Linda Ford.
Starting time.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Granville. I hope you and your family are well. And I'm just going to reiterate what everyone else is saying. We need to abolish the tax lien sale, not, extend it, postponed it, because we know the Black and Brown communities are the ones that are impacted by it the most. That whole process for the lien sale is outdated, it's archaic, and it just needs to be abolished completely. We have people losing their homes sometimes just for hundreds of dollars. And it's, it's a disgrace and it's predatory. And I think the best thing for the council members, anyone that has impact to make this, tax lien sale go away, that's what should be done. It should be abolished because it's preying on those who have no voice to speak for themselves. And that's why we're all here today speaking for them. So I ask you, please abolish the tax lien sale. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Albert Scott from East New York Community Land Trust, followed by Linda Ford, followed by Sarah H.
Starting time.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Albert Scott, and I'm with the East New York Community Land Trust Initiative. And just like my peers mentioned earlier, asking New York City Council and definitely this committee to champion to abolish the New York City tax lien sale. Apparently, this sale has been weaponized, first for the Wall Street firms to take away land and properties within Black and Brown communities. And then now it's been further weaponized where crooks utilize this as leads to target communities of color. By abolishing this tax lien sale will be the first initial step in addressing this prevalent issue of deed fraud, in which it targets communities such as Brownsville and East New York. And I just definitely want to remind this dynamic body, the New York City Council, that this was a former Mayor Rudolph Giuliani law that perpetuated this, and he was definitely not a friend of communities such as Brownsville and East New York. Keep the generational wealth in which communities and individuals have worked so hard for in maintaining their properties and remained in communities such as Brownsville and East New York when everyone had left. Abolish the New York City tax lien sale. We need your help to remain in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Linda Ford, followed by Sarah H.
Starting time.
Linda Ford. Okay, next we'll be hearing from Sarah H.
Starting time.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Sarah Lee Hack. I am a victim of deed fraud, home theft. I completely understand to say, I just want to say thank you, first of all, for having me here, to all the committees. I would just like to say I agree with Mr. Cobb. And I've been in this situation for maybe 2 going on 3 years now. I've reached out to help. I've been with numerous numbers of attorneys that refused to take my case because they were all involved with the same circle of the situation that's going on. I were notified by the Department of Finance saying that someone was trying to put a deed in my home. I contacted them, explained everything, and so far, as Mr. Cobb said, I reached out to the Attorney General, several council members, and still no help. The only person that I've received any type of help from was Mr. Carnegie's office. And I appreciate that, Mr. Carnegie. But as they said, there's not enough that's going on to enforce or to push the issue that's going on right now, because people are still suffering and they don't know how to respond to what's going on. I have all my documents, everything is, I have my title, my deed, everything, and they're claiming that my house was sold under an auction lien when I didn't owe anything. And now they taken out at least 2 or 3 mortgages on my home. They took over my water bill, and I'm still living on the property. They even sent me eviction notices, which one lawyer had said to me that it was fake. And she took herself off the case, which she was a civil suit lawyer. And she said she couldn't help me because she was too deep involved with what's going on. So how can we get help if the majority of these lawyers and legal aid supposed to be helping us get through this? How are we supposed to get help as a victim? Thank you for your help, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Last, we'll be hearing from Linda Ford.
Starting time.
Hi, Linda. You have to let us unmute you, or else we won't be able to hear your testimony. Okay, I'm sorry. We'll need to be able to hear you. Okay, well, thank you. This concludes the public testimony for today's today's hearing. If we've inadvertently forgotten to call on somebody to testify, that person could raise their hand using the Zoom function. We will try to hear from you. We will now turn the hearing over to Chair Cornegie to close the hearing.
Thank you, Janan. Thank you, everyone who's testified today. And although this hearing is coming to an end, the work necessary to secure and to protect our homeowners in this city is not ending. This is the beginning of a collaboration, a continued collaboration between policy, legislation, advocacy, to make sure that we can protect those very vulnerable homeowners who are standing right in front of deed theft and deed fraud. I want to say that in communities like mine, this is a 3-leg stool between deed theft and deed fraud, the use of the lien sale list and the use of the third-party transfer list to conspiring when it's unchecked to displace homeowners. There's displacement, massive displacement around the city for tenants, and there are tenants' rights and protections. We have to have the same staunch advocacy and policy and legislation around home ownership. In Black communities, home ownership has conspired to help us build wealth and to transfer wealth, to pay for our children's educations, to pay for the ability to start businesses, and equity is incredibly important. And so we don't want to look past that. So I want to thank my partners in city and state government for their work in this. I want to especially say thank you to the co-chairs of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus who have taken this up as a mantle. A special thank you to Corey Johnson, who is our speaker, and a very special thank you to our finance chair, Danny Drum, for co-chairing this hearing and for the emphasis put on this for communities of color around the city and state of New York. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to—
Oh, wait. Chair Cornegie, Chair John would like just to make it short.
Passing it to Danny. That was my I was bounced past to Danny. My only reference for today too, by the way.
Thank you. The only thing I wanted to say is thank you to you, Chair Cornegy. This was an excellent hearing, very informative, and particularly emotional to hear the stories of those who have been directly affected by deed fraud. So thank you, and I look forward to continuing to work on the legislation and to pass it as soon as possible in the City Council. Thank you very much, Chair Cornegy.
Thank you. And with that, the